First, obviously, thank you for joining us today on what is a very busy day on Capitol Hill and in the nation. First, Congressman, describe for me your reaction when you saw the very first video and images coming out of the Capitol last week during the riot.
I was heartbroken. It was outrageous. I was so disappointed in what we were seeing. Of course, this violence was totally unacceptable and tragically led to the death of a young woman and a death of a Capitol Hill police officer. And we sadly had a suicide of a Capitol Hill police officer. So it was a really tragic day for our country.
Getting to today's business, the matter at hand, will you vote to impeach President Trump?
No, I'm going to vote against impeachment. Obviously, the president bears some responsibility. His action and words obviously were very regrettable in many respects, and he is not blameless. Having said that, I do not believe that his words rise to the level of impeachable conduct. And more importantly, and to the point, with only 7 days left in this president's administration and in his term, I do not see how this impeachment effort provides a path forward to bring the country to the healing and the unity that we need. The president-elect last week, to his credit, said that we do need to turn the page and focus on uniting and healing the country. I agree with President-elect Biden in that. And I don't think an act of political vengeance is likely to produce an outcome that will bring the country together, which is what we so desperately need at this moment.
What will it take to do that? What will it take to bring the country together?
Well, I talked to a lot of my Democrat colleagues about this. We talk to one another in the Congress about what it's going to take. And I really believe it does take personal relationships. We need to recognize that there's a lot of people who are hurting in this country, people who don't trust our election system, people in the Black Lives Matter movement who feel left behind. Of course, none of that sense of disenfranchisement justifies violence in any context, whether it's the U.S. Capitol building, Portland, Kenosha, any of these scenes that we've seen over the last year. But what we do need to do is have a little empathy for one another and sit down and build personal relationships with one another and listen to one another. And I think lowering the temperature and doing a little bit of listening to one another and recognizing that people do feel left behind in this country on both the right and the left, I think will help begin the process of healing.
I'm assuming you're meaning that kind of relationship building on Capitol Hill, but don't you think, and I'm sure you include this, don't you think we need that in every community in America today?
Absolutely, no doubt about it. And we need our leaders in our country to lead by example in that respect. And again, one of the main reasons I am voting against impeachment, but also voted for the certification of the election and for the peaceful transition, is that I believe we do need to move forward in the country. And so we need to lead by example in Congress and be willing to work across the aisle and listen to one another. But in our communities, I think that's important as well. And so I encourage my constituents and Americans all around this great country to do a little bit more listening, have a little bit more empathy for one another, recognize that just because you have a different political perspective or you may have a different political party affiliation, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means that we have a difference of opinion. And in our country, the greatness of America is the fact that we resolve our differences not through violence, but through peaceful transition of power, through elections, and also through civilized discourse and debate. I want us to get back to that place in our country where we find common ground through civilized discussion and debate, having open hearts and minds, and certainly condemning violence in any form.
The Senate Majority Leader has reportedly now sided with those who will vote for impeachment. Are you surprised by this, and why do you think Senator McConnell has turned against the president, if you will?
Well, obviously, some Republicans will be voting for impeachment. Some of my colleagues, not, I don't think a large number, but some will. And I respect colleagues in my party and then on the other side who have to make a decision for themselves. I mean, I've looked at the facts, and I don't think as a legal matter, the actions and words of the president rise to the level of impeachment, but others may come to a different conclusion, and I respect that. I think my overarching point is that we do need to lower the temperature and move forward with only 7 days left in this administration, and not do something that looks more like political vengeance. But at the end of the day, I don't think any of this is going to make a difference. We are going to have a new president. We're going to have a peaceful transition of power. And our job as leaders going forward is to try to do the best we can to bring the country together.
One reason cited for the desire to impeach the president by some Republicans has been it might be easier now to expel him from the Republican Party so that the party as a whole can move on. Agree or disagree?
Well, I do think that the president's conduct and words last Wednesday will be taken into account in terms of his political future, if he has one and if he even desires one. So I'm not sure that's really relevant. I think that will all be taken into account. My main focus, though, Nancy, is to do my best to try to bring people together and move the country forward. And I think continuing to try to humiliate the political opposition is really not in the best interest of our country at this time.
Here in your district, the controversy hit even closer to home in recent days with the University of Kentucky basketball players taking a kneel during the national anthem last weekend in Florida. Your reaction to this? A lot of people here are very hurt by that. Many stand behind these players to make up their own minds. What is your reaction as a fan as their congressman?
I'm a big fan, just like every one of your viewers, of the Kentucky Wildcat basketball program. I respect the program, and I respect and consider a personal friend, Coach Calipari. And, you know, I respect the fact that he really cares deeply. I know this. He genuinely cares about those players, and he supports those players, and I have to respect that. In terms of, in general, this trend of athletes, not just at UK, but in general, kneeling during the national anthem, I would just offer this thought, is that at least to a large majority of the American people, that's an offensive thing to do. And I've never really understood why anyone would think that doing something offensive and divisive would be a way to persuade someone to your point of view. Of course, the First Amendment protects that. Free speech protects their right to do it. But I've never understood why anyone would think that disrespecting the national anthem of a country that gives you the very right to protest somehow would persuade people up to your point of view. I have never quite understood that. And I would hasten to add that violence is even less persuasive, and it's an even a less effective way of communicating. So again, Nancy, I would hope that we would get back to a place in our country where neither offensive conduct nor violence would be used as a way to persuade people to your point of view. I think we need to get back to civilized discourse. I understand some people have a different point of view, but that's just my point of view. I believe, and we have to recognize that kneeling during the national anthem does offend many people.
You came out very passionately last week when Twitter was the first to ban President Trump from their platform. Others have followed. What's your opinion right now on big tech, on those social media platforms, any social media platforms, banning someone for political views?
Well, just as I think the First Amendment protects an athlete engaging in conduct that some people deem offensive, I also think it runs counter to the values of free expression when big tech censors the speech of the president. I think it's very offensive that Twitter or big tech companies, Facebook, others would censor the speech of a U.S. president, even a president that some view as offensive, when at the same time they're elevating the speech of literally the enemies of the United States, including top officials with the Chinese Communist Party, the Ayatollah in Iran, leaders of the Nation of Islam, other individuals. And so what it looks like to many people is selective censorship. It's the politicization of speech. It's the idea that only conservative speech should be censored, but other speech should not be. It's this double standard that I think is a problem. And for those who say, well, wait a minute, these are private companies, the First Amendment is not at issue here because there's no state action. I think those individuals need to look at the antitrust laws in this country, because clearly these companies are engaged in anti-competitive behavior, trying to stifle any competition from Parler or other competitive platforms. And I think that does implicate state action. I think that does potentially implicate the First Amendment. And so I think Congress will be taking a good look at this.
Congressman, do you feel safe at the Capitol right now? What's your assessment of security? And will you be at the inauguration next week? Will you be concerned?
Yes, I mean, as I said before, I do support the peaceful transition of power. And even though the candidate from my party didn't win the presidential election, I think it's very important that members of Congress go to the inauguration. I will be attending the inauguration and celebrating this democratic transfer of power in our country. And as I said, I want to work with the incoming administration of the president where I can, and where I need to be the loyal opposition, I will. And I recognize I represent a lot of people who voted for President-elect Biden. Not a majority, but I represent those individuals as well. So I will be attending the inauguration, and I want to see our country succeed no matter who is the president. In terms of safety, I do feel safe. The Capitol Hill police presence has been strengthened. The Washington, D.C. Law enforcement is here in force, and the National Guard has been surged, and additional security measures have been put into place. There's been a barrier that's been erected around the Capitol complex, and the National Guard has a very robust presence. Clearly, there was a failure in the run-up to the January 6th mayhem and violence at the and the incursion into the Capitol building. We need to learn from that. We need to investigate what happened. And I know that we're getting briefings about how the Capitol Hill Police, the Secret Service, the FBI, federal law enforcement, and the National Guard are taking steps to secure the inauguration to prevent any violence. But I will have to say also, Nancy, we are hearing credible threats and intelligence reports of potential problems, and we need to be prepared for that.
Should the inauguration go on outdoors in public with a large gathering? Would you change the way it's conducted altogether because of those threats?
Law enforcement is not telling us and not recommending that at this time. The Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, the Capitol Police, the Secret Service, they're all involved. I have confidence in these agencies, and they're telling us that the inauguration can proceed. But obviously, given the events of the last week, we're going to see, and because of these credible threats, we are going to see a much more robust security presence than we would otherwise normally see during an inauguration.
Pivoting a bit to the pandemic now, the speed of the vaccine rollout has been disappointing to everyone, I would imagine. And apparently at this rate, it will take most of 2021 to get everyone the shot who wants one. Why is it taking so long here in Kentucky and in the nation, and what can be done about it?
Well, I was very happy that Operation Warp Speed and the appropriations that Congress put into place did expedite the approval of many of these vaccines, and a lot of credit goes to the pharmaceutical companies and the scientists that really did a lot of great work to get these vaccines approved, and the government, the FDA, for having an expedited approval without compromising safety and efficacy. And I do believe in the safety and efficacy of these vaccines. So to the extent some people don't trust them, I think we have some work to do to instill confidence in the American people that these are in fact safe and effective. I do think the distribution of these vaccines has some problems. I think maybe the over prioritization process has impeded some willing participants from getting the vaccine quicker. The states, by and large, are in charge of the distribution. The federal government has provided each of the states with flexibility to make those priorities within the states. But I would just say, from a standpoint of the national leadership, we need to encourage our fellow countrymen to get vaccinated. I received both of my vaccines. I had very mild side effects and symptoms, a little bit of chills after the second administration of the vaccine. But we need most Americans, in order for us to get that herd immunity, we need most Americans to go ahead and trust the scientists and the government for approving these vaccines. I certainly did. I have confidence in it. Hopefully, I'm leading by example by getting the vaccine. And I would encourage those eligible citizens to go ahead and get vaccinated so that we can overcome this pandemic. That's really going to be key to reopening our economy and going back to life as normal.
The states had 9-10 months to plan for a possible vaccine rollout. It's not going so well, especially, here in Kentucky. It's not moving very quickly. Would you say it's time now maybe for the national government to step in and take over some of these logistics? I mean, everyone may want it, but if they can't get it.
Right. I think we need to be agile and flexible. And what I would encourage the states to do, and if the federal government decides to step in, I think what we need to do is that, to the extent a healthcare worker on the front lines refuses to get vaccinated or elects to not get vaccinated, and I don't believe in mandatory vaccinations, but if they choose to not to, we need to move to the next vulnerable population. We need to make that vaccine that was declined available quickly to the next person so that we can move more of the population into that population that's been vaccinated. I think that's especially important for older Americans, for senior citizens, people who we know have a particular vulnerability to COVID-19. I want to see those citizens, especially over the age of 65, those who want it, to get vaccinated as soon as possible, because of course we know that this illness affects them in more life-threatening ways.
Are you aware of a high incidence of healthcare workers refusing the vaccine in Kentucky?
Anecdotally, I have heard that. I don't have any statistics, but I have heard from my constituents that there are some healthcare workers who, for whatever reason, are not taking the vaccine. That's troubling. I know that most of the doctors that I've talked to and the frontline healthcare workers and the nurses that I've personally talked to, they are getting the vaccine. They want the vaccine. They know they're exposed and particularly vulnerable because they interact with these contagious patients. But there are some anecdotal feedback that I'm getting from some constituents that some healthcare workers are not getting it. Look, if they don't want to get it and they just want to rely on the PPE, the protective equipment, that's their choice. But we need to move those doses of vaccines onto vulnerable populations so that we get most of the American people vaccinated within the next few months.
The political discourse in Kentucky has not been much better than it has been nationally. I don't know if you're aware, but there was a petition submitted asking for articles of impeachment against Governor Barr. By law, a committee has to be formed to take that into consideration. What is your take on that political discourse here? Should we move past any suggested impeachment of our governor? What would you like to see happen? Because I know you're still very connected right back here at the grassroots level.
Yeah, as I said before, I think we all need to lower the temperature. Just as impeachment in the nation's capital is probably not warranted at this time, given the divisive, toxic political culture that we live in right now. I'm not sure what that would accomplish in Kentucky as well. Of course, it's not my role. It's the role of the Kentucky General Assembly, and I don't even know what the allegations are. But I would just say for all of us, I think we need to start healing this country and doing the best we can to work with one another and solve the really big problems that face us. Whether we're Republicans or Democrats, whether we're conservatives or moderates or liberals, there's a lot of people in this country who feel disenfranchised, who are struggling. We've got an addiction crisis. We have poverty to contend with. We have the economic crisis, the pandemic. There's a lot of problems that we need to solve. And I just would hope that we could come together and roll up our sleeves as Americans and not as partisans and really try to solve some of these problems together.